Okay, so how many of you have watched or read the Lorax before? Okay, that's good. So anyway, I'll give you 1 minute summary to be on the same ground. So once upon a time, there was an ambitious guy called Wensler. He discovered a great material called the thneed, extracted from these amazing trees. And he found that he could manufacture lots of products from it, like clothes and other stuff. So he started to cut the trees, and he said, I would manufacture lots of products out of it. In the middle of all this, a creature called the Lorax appeared to him, warning him of all the consequences of his work and what could affect the environment and other creatures. And he told him that I speak for the trees. But the Wensler was very overwhelmed by the reception of his products in the market. And he told him everybody needs a thneed. So he was proud of his work, and he moved on working with more and more products. And every now and then, the Lorax appeared to him, warning him and saying that, take care of the consequences of the work you're doing. But then he said, okay, I can do more. So he built a big factory to create more thneed. And along the way, he was cutting all the trees. The Lorax felt sad at the end, seeing all the trees being cut, and he gave up and disappeared. On the other hand, the Wensler regretted what he did and hid in a place far, far away, leaving one word with a hidden message in front of his house, engraved on a stone. So he had the word unless. Years later, a small, curious kid just passed by and wanted to know what unless meant and if he could do anything about this. So he asked, unless what? And this is not the end, and before going to the end, let me ask you if you see any similarities between this story and what humans do all the time whenever they find new resources. Or if you find any similarities with what could happen in the data science and AI world. So years ago, when the hype of the data started, people said, data is a new oil. And they started to use these quotes over and over with a positive meaning, forgetting the other side of the story. But someone like Drew Conway said, yes, data is a new oil, but in a way that is a commodity that requires incredible resource allocation to extract value and deep expertise to manage. And even if everything goes right, there could be negative consequences. So this is something we need to make sure we understand all the time. And later on, when the AI machine learning hype started, people started to use the word AI-powered or machine learning enabled beside any product they have, even if it's just simple automation or if it's just 3 data points. But let's talk about the real complex machine learning models that people would use. So for this, we say all the time machine learn, but we need to ask the question, who is the teacher? Because this is important in our narratives and how we deal with the consequences and everything. So let's see how the teacher performed years ago, even before automation or extensive machine learning use, to see the patterns and how things would go. So years ago, in the 60s and the 70s, Kodak used what they called the Shirley cards to standardize their negative or to calibrate their systems. And these were a set of cards with different color ranges like this. And if you look for a couple of seconds, you can catch what's wrong with this. All the models are white with long hair. So this is the only color range, and this is the default color range they taught their machines to calibrate their colors on. And then you can see the problem when you go to a photo with mixed color or different shades of brown. So here the product failed, and it failed because of something people couldn't change about themselves. And this is one of the definitions of fairness, that products should not fail because because of something people cannot change about themselves. But this was a long time ago, and probably they didn't have more insights into the diversity and the representation in the data sets. So now we have images, and millions of them labeled and annotated everywhere if we are working with real image classification or recognition problems. So for instance, we have ImageNet with millions of photos labeled, and also open images by Google. So now we can say that we are working better and having more diversity. Probably not so much also, because recently there was a paper published by a team in Google Brain called No Classification Without Representation. And they looked into these two specific data sets, referring to the fact that the majority of the photos are coming from Western countries. And if you look, you can find the representation of the United States in specific in both cases. So this reminds me of different cultures. And this might be not a problem if you have photos about something that is not related to cultures. But they picked a specific example about wedding photos. And in this scale, you can simply say if you are on the right, you have more consistent and better classification. So you can see that the United States and Australia have better classification compared to Pakistan. And you can know why, because Pakistan have different costumes in weddings, and probably they have less representation also in the data set. And this reminds me of a paper published in a different context years ago in the field of social sciences and cognitive behavior, and the title of the paper was The Weirdest People in the World. And the authors try to highlight or argue that in their field, most of the research is coming from what they call the weird countries, which are the Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries. And they said this would make things harder to generalize over other countries in cognitive behavior and social sciences. And they even made different use cases where they refer to small data sets coming from the US in specific, for example, because that's where the research was funded. So now with this problem of representation, we are taking it and teaching it to machines, or transferring it to other domains. And that's why there are other efforts, or some people who raise flags to address such research questions. So for example, Google launched a competition called the Inclusive Image Competition, showing the specific use case and how the classification failed for a different culture in wedding photos. And they invited researchers to address this problem even with unbalanced data set. And I think they will publish the papers next month or something. So these examples are all about images, classification, and stuff like this. And you might feel that they are not very critical, or fairness is not that big issue about them. But it might be if you extend these use cases to more stuff where you have security issues, or you unlock a product if you get recognized, or stuff like that. So if you cannot unlock something because of your color or your race or anything, this would be a failure of the product. But there is another type of products which affect us every day on social media, news websites, and online marketplaces, which are recommender systems, scoring, ranking, and matchmaking. So recently there was an article about Amazon scrapping an AI recruiting tool that showed bias against women. And I picked this specific example because for the last 2 years I was working in the same industry, and I can imagine what can go wrong with biases if you put it in this process in specific, or if you learn from the history wrong patterns. And they said that the system taught itself that males are more preferable, and it penalized the word women. So even if you are a male who taught women or in a women's college, you will be penalized because you have the word women in your CV. And I have a small problem with this narrative that people say AI system failed or learned or something like that, as if AI systems create themselves. But actually, as we said, it's humans who teach the system. So the system didn't teach itself, it just learned from humans who reflected their biases in their system. And I can imagine, even if I don't have access to what happened in this project, but I can imagine that someone along the way came and told them that this is human bias amplification. Take care, he raised a flag. Or someone said, we are creating unfairness at scale. But probably people were so proud of their work and were confident that nothing would go wrong, and they proceeded. So this reminds me of a quote last year by Josh Wills from Slack, who was talking about machine learning, and he said that he worries all the time about building things that hurt people. And I can imagine this is a worry for many people in the data world, and some people even might quit the whole profession because they fear that they would harm others. Another portion would conform and say, that's how business works. And there is a third portion that tries to question things and find solutions before things go worse. But one step to make sure that things are not getting worse is to acknowledge the facts and remind everybody around that it's always human who create data sets, create data products, and define metrics. And in each step, something can go wrong. So in collecting and labeling data, something can go wrong in putting biases in representation or labels and more. And while creating data products, there could be a problem with the split of train and test data. There could be a problem with putting proxies to features that should not be related or to the product itself, like race, religion, or anything. And there could be a use of complex machine learning models without interpretability. And this is a problem in different ways because you don't have enough trust. People cannot know why decision was made, or you cannot even find out if someone hacked the system, whether this was a hack or this was the behavior of the model. So interpretability is something to invest in, and it's coming better with time. And in defining metrics also, we have to ask all the time, what are we optimizing for? Are you optimizing for something that would also benefit the user? Or are you just optimizing for clicks that might create feedback loop or promote hate speech or anything like this? And you can also find out and make sure you see how different types of errors affect different groups. So your false positive and false negatives, if they are effective a specific group differently, this wouldn't be fair enough. So all these are things and flags to raise all the time, no matter where you are in the data world. So if you are on the business side or you are a data scientist, you can raise flags, you can question all these things. And maybe till now, we lack a good understanding of how to put ethics into practice in our data products, as DJ Patel, Hilary Mason, and Mike referred in their book. But this is something they also try to discover and talk about with people, because maybe we have different views on this topic, but we don't have really good understanding of how to raise an issue, how to pull back a product, and where to think, is it just something we raise a flag, or as a data scientist, do you have impact on this, or do you need someone independent to think about it? So the process itself is not mature, but we have to think about how to put it and have it on the table all the time, because nothing will get better unless. And this was the unless the little guy wanted to find out unless what. So for him, unless meant unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better, nothing is not. And for him, the action he could take was to plant a seed. So even if everything went bad, he could find one seed to plant, he could care and do something. And for us, it's the same. We just need to think, care, and plant the seeds of fairness in our products to make sure that things do not get bad. And we have the seeds of fairness in our products. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Omayma.